Previously on Knife Making with Outdoors 55. I cut out a knife-shaped piece of wood. I also cut out a knife-shaped piece of steel, sanded and filed till my arms fell off, and glued some stuff together. Welcome to part 2. Alright guys, so it is the next day, and first off I want to apologize for the beeping in the background. If you can hear it, it seems like whenever I turn the camera on, there's always beeping. Now I said this video is going to be different in the beginning, and it's definitely turning out to be different. The first thing that I want to mention is that I will never ever do a knife again with liners without first pre-gluing the liner to the scale material. It just saves so much aggravation and so much time. And if you've never done a knife before with liners, I would definitely recommend not even trying to do the liners without first pre-gluing them. It will save you so much aggravation and so much time, it's not even funny. Secondly, if you've never worked with epoxy before, and this especially applies to people who are in colder climates, is you need to take your epoxy inside where it's warm in order to get a good bond. Now let me give you a quick backstory on what happened. Basically, I have some handle material and some liner material that I epoxied and super glued together about 5 days ago. I left them out here to sit. The temperatures ranged anywhere from 40 degrees to 20 degrees. And I came out here today, again after these have sat for 5 days, picked up the one that I glued with G-Flex. Both of these were glued super similar. I had a piece sticking out like this. I took my fingers and I twisted like this, and the thing just popped apart. The surface prep on this was done exactly how I do any other surface prep, and it literally just fell apart. This one was done with Gorilla Glue super glue. Surface prep exactly the same, everything exactly the same, and this is so strong. I mean, I've been beating on it with a hammer. Look at this. And to peel it, I actually kind of broke the G10 there trying to peel it. The Gorilla Glue super glue is so strong that it even adhered this shiny plastic rubber piece onto the shiny piece of the scale material. So if you're going to be using epoxy to pre-glue your scale material and your liner material together, you got to do it inside where it's warm. Now this kind of concerns me because this epoxy right now in cold weather is super brittle, and I know epoxies have a reputation for being super brittle and kind of failing under super cold weather conditions, but it's not that cold out here. Like I said, the temperatures ranged anywhere from 40 degrees to 20 degrees. Now that is a little bit cold for epoxy to cure properly, but my question is it the epoxy not curing properly, or is it just because the epoxy is cold and turned brittle? Now I know this is something that I'm going to end up experimenting with in some future videos, so stay tuned for that. So in part 1, I heat treated the blade, which involves quenching and tempering at 400 for 2 2-hour cycles. Now it's time to finish grinding the bevels. You can probably hear the sound the file's making on the hardened blade. It's definitely a hardened steel, but the file is still cutting into it as it should, because the file is still a lot harder than this blade is. Now, sharpening and grinding bevels on a hardened blade like this with a file is going to wear out your file faster, but honestly, I don't really care. Alright, so that's actually the first time I've used a file on the bevel jig to clean up a bevel like that after heat treat, and it worked out really well. I'm really happy with it. Took a while, took about a half an hour, but not too bad in the grand scheme of things. I don't know if this is a dumb idea or not. So I ended up taking some 120 grit sandpaper and just wrapped it around the file to help finish sand and get out some of those deep file scratches. Again, this worked quite well. The file did eventually tear through the sandpaper, so I ended up just kind of wrapping the sandpaper around the steel rod. Only problem area was right near the plunge line. Just using a little sanding block here and some 320 paper to help clean up this bevel here. The last couple of knives I've done, I've only taken the bevels to 600 grit. That seems to be a really nice finish without being too much work. After that I moved to the flats, which are pretty much the same. Started at 150 and ended up going to 600. Honestly, anything finer than that seems to get really expensive fast when doing it by hand. If you notice, I'm just using a block of wood for a sanding block. This works okay if you don't have anything else, but I am going to replace this with something that stays a little bit flatter. You can probably see how the bevel grind lines have sort of lost their definition, and that is, as far as I can tell, due to the sanding block flexing a bit, as I was super careful about trying to keep it flat during the sanding process. I think I'd like to get a piece of aluminum to kind of replace the wood with. I think that it would stay a little bit flatter. If you happen to know of something else to use, let me know. I'm just going to tape this up here real quick to protect the finish. And I hate it when this happens. Look at this. Next, I prepped the tang, or the handle of the knife, on the belt sander and roughed it up really well for the epoxy. And I completely forgot to get footage of that, but for some reason I got tons of footage of the tang just kind of sitting there all roughed up. I don't know, I guess I thought it looked cool. So now, let's talk about how I almost ruined the scales. In a previous video, I thought about stacking both the scales and the knife blank together and trying to drill the pinholes and everything else at once. In that video I decided against that, but in this video I said, why not? Let's try it. The footage I'm showing you now is me drilling everything at once. Now because I glued the liners first and the lanyard hole is staggered, meaning not in line with the pins, you can't drill everything at once unless your liners are stacked together exactly how they would be on the knife. What I did here is wrong. I should have had the liners facing each other. If you stack them like I did here and drill everything, when you flip the opposite scale over onto the correct side of the blade, it won't line up as the liner will be on the wrong side. Luckily, I was able to fix this by simply cutting out another liner and gluing it onto the correct side when I went to do the final glue up. Now I suppose you could stack everything together and drill everything at once if you make sure your liners are together as they would be on the knife when you go and do the drilling. For me, right now, I'm just going to stick to drilling everything separately. I think that's the safer option. Remember, this video is all about screwing up. This is not about doing things the right way. It should be simple, but it's not. Maybe next time I should do something like extremely complicated and it'll be really easy. Well, when you screw up, you learn. That's what I keep telling myself anyway. It's better than getting all upset. I got upset off camera and screamed and cried, and then I came back and turned the camera on and said, it's gonna be okay. I better make sure this is exactly right this time. Can't screw this up again. So I just prepped a new liner real quick, and I also prepped all my pins on a 60 grit belt. You have to be careful prepping your pins this way, as you can easily take the diameter of the pins down too much. Then I just temporarily put the pins and scales together to finish the front portion of the scales. Next, I drilled some partial holes in the scales in the same location as the holes drilled in the tang. My thinking is this will help make little epoxy pins that go all the way through and help lock everything together. Then inside where it's warm, I epoxied everything together. You guys have seen me do this before, it's nothing new. Clean / degrease everything, put epoxy on every surface, and clamp it together. Alright, so it's been 48 hours later, the epoxy's cured fully, and now it's time for every knife maker's favorite part, or at least it's my favorite part, and that is shaping the handle. Honestly, and I've said this before, but there's not much to say about this part. You kind of just use every tool at your disposal in order to shape the handle to your personal preference. I do most of the rough shaping on the belt sander, then once I get it close I move to hand shaping. And again, shape it to your preference, there's no correct way. I ended up sanding it to 1500 grit and then buffed it on a buffing wheel to make it shine, but if you want you can definitely keep it rough to add to the grip. Remember, you can always remove more, but you can't put it back. I then finished sharpening the blade on 600 grit sandpaper and then did a couple blade touch-ups. I could have spent a little bit more time doing this, but I couldn't wait any longer. I had to take it outside to test it. Everything out here is soaked. I'm not real sure how good any of this is going to take a spark. I mean, it's soaked. We got a huge ice storm here the last couple days, and had like rain and all kinds of stuff, so everything's soaking wet. Oh yeah, that's a good feather stick. Still shaving sharp. I don't know if you can see that or not. So yeah, this thing worked out really well. I really like this thing. Gonna be taking this on hopefully a trip soon. Hopefully we'll get out and do some hiking trips, backpacking, bushcrafting, I don't know. Something like that. Success. Now I can't put it out. It's working good. Real nice. I think we're done here. Knife has worked out really well. No chipping, edge rolling, nothing like that. It still shaves after we did all this. It batons well. It does everything exactly how I want it to do. Just want to thank you guys for watching. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Don't forget to hit the like button, and we'll see you in the next video.